and the small number of assistants, housekeeping and medical staff tending to the electors have also sworn to secrecy. One of the final acts before conclave begins, the doors to the Apostolic Palace sealed with the words conclave and 2025. This conclave will be like no other. 133 cardinals voting, 80% of them were appointed by Pope Francis. They come from every corner of the world, 71 different countries, the largest and most diverse conclave in history. Once the Pope is elected, he'll head to the Room of Tears next to the Sistine Chapel, where these white papal vestments are already waiting for him. And then the 267th Pope will emerge for the world to see.
Big thanks to James Longman for that report. And I want to bring in Inez de la Quatara, who's there in Rome right now. Inez, what's happening as they get ready to start this conclave, and what are people saying ahead of that?
Hey, Diane. Yeah, and the start of the conclave just moments away now. We are waiting for that procession to begin when the cardinal electors, all 133 of them, will enter the chapel in a procession. That will mark the official start of the conclave after they close the doors and they are locked in there to elect a new pope. So we're waiting for that. That'll be the last we see of them until a new pope is elected. The crowds are starting to gather here, so there are big screens kind of set up behind me, and we are starting to see crowds building to watch this procession. I think it's a lot of groups of pilgrims who are here and people who are just curious about this process. Lots of excitement here when you talk to people on the square. Catholics very excited to see who the next pope will be, curious to see the smoke, curious to see whether this will be a short conclave like most people seem to believe it will be, or whether this could, on the contrary, be a longer conclave. I spoke to one cardinal who was telling me that the cardinals don't really know each other, and so they're going to need more time to get to know each other. So we could be looking at a longer conclave.
And as you spoke to cardinals ahead of today's ceremonies, what did they tell you about what they're looking for in a new pope?
Yeah, so it depends who you talk to. There are those like Haitian Cardinal Langlois who says you can't talk about the next pope without talking about Pope Francis and the legacy he left. He wants to see someone who's going to continue that legacy. He says he wants someone who's going to continue what Pope Francis started. He mentioned inclusivity as something that is top of mind for him. There are those looking at other issues. So, for example, Cardinal Czerny of Canada is looking at someone who's going to be able to tackle AI, the proliferation of wars. Cardinal Arborelius of Sweden talked a lot about evangelization and the fact that the church is growing in places like Africa and Asia. So he thinks there could be a pope from Africa or Asia. That would be the first pope from Africa or Asia. So we'll see. But I think the general feeling overall from talking to those three cardinals is they want someone who's going to be able to face the current challenges facing the church.
All right, Inez de la Quatara, thank you. And I want to bring in consultant to the Vatican, Helen Alvarez, and Catholic commentator Gloria Purvis for more. Thank you both for coming on. I know it's a busy time. So, Helen, what do you think the cardinals are looking for? You heard what Inez just said. And do you think we can take away from any prior elections here?
You know, they're looking for something so large, it's really hard for people to imagine. And it's why only with God's grace can a man take this on. They're looking for somebody, I believe, as your reporter said, who can take on the challenges of the time. And those challenges are enormous. They involve the church showing both that it is a place that reaches out to everybody, right? That everybody feel the love of Christ, while at the same time putting to rest some of the divisions of the last, 10, 13 years over whether the church is going to change some of its teachings. They need someone who can show that there's simply no daylight between the church's teachings on social justice outside the family and within the family with its traditional teachings on sex, marriage, and parenting. Put that to rest and move forward to evangelize.
And Gloria, give us a little history lesson here, because this is a ritual dating back hundreds of years. So how did the conclave come to be what it is today, and why is so secretive?
Well, in the early part of the church, more than just cardinals had a say on who could become the Holy Father. Then around the year 1059, it was limited to just cardinals being able to vote. Then a few centuries later, it said, okay, 2/3 of the cardinals have to decide who is the Holy Father. Then a few centuries later, we had, after one of the longest conclaves in history, after about 2 years, the Pope that was elected then, Gregory X, said we need to be locked away and free of all the distractions from interference. So that's why we have the conclave the way it is now, where the cardinal electors are sequestered from the public. all the security to make sure there are no radios and interference and things like that, so they could actually have the time to be in attune with whatever the moving of the Holy Spirit is prompting them to do with regard to selecting our next Holy Father.
Helen, what are some of the biggest issues you think the next Pope will have to navigate?
So, externally, I think a Catholic Pope has to figure out how to be, in the most attractive, Christ-like fashion possible, a nonpartisan voice of conscience on behalf of the human person. And that takes certain personal qualities, certain intellectual qualities, the ability and the desire to go out to the whole world. It is also, I think, going to be somebody who really does have a handle on some administrative skills and bringing transparency, efficiency, et cetera, to the Holy See.
And Gloria, cardinals from all over the world are now in Vatican City. Why is that global nature of the church so important?
Well, it reflects the face of humanity. The church is a global body because that was the command of Christ, to go out and make disciples of every nation. The church also has a moral voice in the whole world, that everyone still looks to the church, as old as it is. It's outlived so many empires, the Ottoman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and the church remains. This papal office remains. And so we have a strong moral voice in the world, and it should reflect the people of the world.
All right, Helen Alvarez, Gloria Purvis, thank you. Coming up, after years of delays, new travel rules are here and causing long lines. What you need to know if you don't have a real ID.
The news never stops.
From Tampa, we are here tonight as Hurricane Milton has just made landfall.
The surge just keeps coming up.
Right on the border between Ukraine and Russia.
We're in artillery position about 2 miles away from Gaza.
And ABC News Live is right there everywhere.
We're not far from where this rally took place, so just stick with us here.
Traveling with the president to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Here in London today.
Off the coast of Gaza.
Downtown Tel Aviv, rockets or missiles coming in.
From the most devastating disaster in Hawaii. Some areas are still smoldering.
Wherever the story.
From the front lines,
the ruins of Rafah.
From the FBI.
Reporting from Capitol Hill.
In western Portugal. Outside of Mexico City.
In Iceland. Let's go.
Here in France.
The eclipse across America.
Just stunning.
Unbelievable.
Streaming live to you.
Wherever the story is.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live. Streaming free everywhere because the news never stops.
They said if you continue taking drugs, within 6 months you'll be dead in prison, and prison. Not for with these eyebrows, I don't think so.
He was a drug addict, a party boy, a complete womanizer.
Russell Brand is facing multiple charges.
Russell Brand denying multiple allegations from rape to sexual assault.
Brand says any encounters were consensual. If convicted, he is now potentially facing life in prison. Sex, drugs, and fame. Now streaming on Hulu.
Welcome aboard the Odyssey.
This life on the high seas, practicing medicine, it's exhilarating.
Everybody out! He's going into shock!
Patient is in critical condition. Need to act right now.
This cannot be happening.
Max? I'm not getting a pulse.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, new travel rules are taking effect today and causing long lines. People are scrambling to get a real ID, worried they won't be able to fly without it. Now the Homeland Security Secretary is clarifying you can still board a plane without one, but it may take you longer. ABC Transportation correspondent Gio Benitez is at Newark Airport with the details.
Hundreds of flights canceled as the travel nightmare, which began at Newark Airport, ripples across the country. At the heart of it, an outdated air traffic control system that the administration is looking to fix.
We need to build a brand new air traffic control system.
Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy set to lay out his overhaul of the nation's air traffic control system, desperately needed after decades of neglect.
These facilities have to operate as we're building new radar, fiber, radios, sensors.
This after a major outage last week cut off communication and radar between air traffic controllers and airplanes around Newark Airport for 60 to 90 seconds. In newly obtained audio, you can hear that confusion. Pilots trying to make contact met by silence. And even when air traffic controllers were finally able to reach various planes, they were still unable to locate them.
We don't have a radar, so I don't know where you are.
And we now know it's not the first time. Similar radar and communication outages happening once a month from August to December at Newark. Radio communications alone also going down at least 8 times. It all comes as another big change hits airports. Real ID now in effect. Hours-long lines from coast to coast ahead of today's launch.
This is my 3rd attempt. Twice I was turned away after a 3-hour wait.
Our Alex Perez outside Chicago's Real ID Supercenter on Tuesday.
For weeks now, this is what the line here has looked like, blocks long, as some getting in line at 4 a.m., hours before the facility even opens.
Travelers were told that starting today, a Real ID compliant driver's license or a sufficient alternative like a passport is needed to fly domestically. But Tuesday, Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem clarifying, saying if you don't have a Real ID yet, you can still fly for now.
If it's not compliant, they may be diverted to a different line, have an extra step, but people will be allowed to fly.
And here at Newark Airport, they aren't separating people without that Real ID just yet. They're just putting them through an extra screening process. But if you don't have one, use that passport no matter where you're going. If you're traveling domestically or internationally, just bring this with you, because if you don't have the Real ID, this is going to work just fine and you'll get through it a lot faster. Also, make an appointment with AAA if you have that membership, because in some states they're actually letting you get a Real ID directly at their offices. So make sure you're looking into that. Otherwise, the Real ID, it's going to take some time to get it if you don't have it just yet. But don't panic. Again, use that passport. Easy as that.
All right, good advice, Gio Benitez. Thank you. And a second U.S. Navy jet is lost in the Red Sea. Officials say the F-18 was trying to land when it fell in the ocean. And right now we're going to go to a special report on the conclave.
Good morning, live from the Vatican City. The papal conclave begins just moments from now. The centuries-old ritual shrouded in secrecy to elect a new pope. Who will it be? How long will it take? Millions watching back in the U.S. and around the world. ABC News live coverage starts right now.
This is an ABC News special. Conclave, the next pope. Reporting live from the Vatican, David Muir.
Good morning from Vatican City. We are here for the start of the papal conclave. The eyes of the world will be locked on the Sistine Chapel from the moment the cardinals enter a short time from now. A short time after they enter, the chapel is then sealed, the cardinals inside, and then we wait until the famous white smoke emerges from the chimney, signaling the newly elected pope will soon be revealed to the world. At this moment, 133 cardinals from around the world are about to take part in a procession leading into the chapel. 108 of the electors were actually appointed by Pope Francis. This is the most diverse conclave ever. The cardinals are from 71 different countries, including 10 from the United States. They will enter the chapel this morning, the doors closing behind them, and they will begin the centuries-old ritual of selecting the next pope to succeed the late Pope Francis. Now, the cardinals have been holding meetings since last week here at the Vatican, some of them meeting for the first time, each cardinal hoping to learn which one of them has the qualities to become the 267th pope to lead the Catholic Church. All voting cardinals are sequestered. They must surrender their cell phones. There will be no messages or outside communication of any kind, in fact. The cardinals will be sworn to secrecy, and you'll see that play out just moments from now here at the Vatican. Their staff and attendants also taking vows of secrecy. In fact, the cardinals face excommunication if they break their oath. And for all of the beautiful soaring sights Rome has to offer, take a look. That small temporary chimney at the Sistine Chapel is all anyone will be focused on until a decision is made, when the cardinals reach a 2/3 majority inside that chapel. Black smoke, of course, signals there is still no pope. White smoke revealing a new pope has been elected. They'll use chemicals to make sure the shade of the smoke is distinct enough to discern white or black, yes or no, do we have a new pope? Because there has been confusion in the past. A short time after we see the white smoke and the bells toll here in Rome, the new pope will emerge on the balcony right here behind us in St. Peter's Square, greeting the crowds, the faithful in the square, the new leader of the world's 1.4 billion Catholics. Inside the chapel, take a look at the images this morning. The tables are in place, the chairs are now set, and when the voting begins, each cardinal will write their choice and place their ballot one by one inside an urn at the front of the chapel, each cardinal bowing to the altar and then returning to his seat. They will cast secret ballots up to 4 times a day, 2 votes in the morning, 2 votes in the afternoon. Now, today they're expected to vote once later this afternoon. The ballots are burned after the voting sessions conclude, but immediately burned if a pope is elected. Again, a 2/3 majority is needed to elect a new pope. 89 votes is the magic number inside that chapel. And when they cross that threshold, we will see the white smoke. And inside, the white papal garments come next. They are hanging in the so-called Room of Tears, where the new pope will come to change and pray before being introduced to the world and perhaps even shed a tear under the weight of his new role. Before being sequestered, the cardinals were pressed by reporters from all over the world, the faithful, following their messages in public and on social media, looking for any clues about which direction cardinals are leaning in for a sign of the possible papal contenders and how long it could take to make a final decision. Will they elect a progressive humanitarian pope similar to Francis, or will they choose a more conservative leader focused on traditional values, the traditional teachings of the Church? One cardinal telling our James Longman here at the Vatican that if the conclave extends beyond Friday night, it will mean something unexpected has happened. We should remember that Pope Francis was elected in 2 days, 5 ballots. Pope Benedict before him was elected in 2 days as well, 4 ballots. But these cardinals, I remind you, are from all over the world. They must get to know each other, so there's no telling how long this could take. And in fact, in looking back at the history of these conclaves, the longest conclave in church history took almost 3 years, 1,006 days in the 13th century. And of course, we're not looking to beat that record here in Rome this time around. I do want to show you the extraordinary position we have here at ABC News. Right here behind me, you can actually see it. This side right here. Those are the velvet drapes that they actually just put up just a couple of days ago here. That's the famous balcony where the new pope will emerge a short time after we see that white smoke. And of course, the question, and we'll talk about it here this morning, is how soon do we think we could see that white smoke? How long will it take to elect a new pope for the Catholic Church? Our team is here at the Vatican and across Rome, and I'm so happy to have Linsey Davis here with us. Father James Martin is back with us. We've got Terry Moran, James Longman, Maggie Rulli, and our whole team out across the Vatican. And Linsey, you can feel the excitement here. You can also sense the uncertainty about which way this could go. And just because so many were appointed by Pope Francis, it doesn't necessarily mean the new pope will be in the mold of Francis.
You're exactly right. The excitement really is palpable. So many anticipating that white smoke. Really a universal symbol that needs no translation. It's been 12 years since we last experienced a conclave, and really every time this College of Cardinals meets, it's to answer one fundamental question, and that is, are we going to have change or are we going to have continuity for the head of the church and the 1.4 billion Catholics around the world? As you mentioned, David, while Pope Francis appointed many of the cardinals here today, there are some who felt he was too unpredictable, too progressive, and so they may not necessarily want that continuation. At the same time, you mentioned how this is the most diverse College of Cardinals ever. He was actually the first pope to appoint more cardinals from outside of Europe, and so that will be very interesting to see. There are people who are suggesting, because you have the fastest growth in the Catholic Church in Africa, in the Americas, will we perhaps see a pope of color? People have said that there are critics who say that it's too soon, that the church is not ready. We'll see in perhaps the coming hours and coming days.
Yeah, it'll be a fascinating couple of days here. And in reaching out to the far corners of the world, Pope Francis was given so much credit for broadening the church, naming those new cardinals. But at the same time, Father Martin, in many of those parts of the world, it's a more conservative Catholic church. So that's a bit of the irony of Pope Francis broadening the church, but again, us not knowing how this is going to go.
Well, that's true. And in certain parts of, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, these are more conservative, you could say, or traditional cardinals. And usually when he was raising up cardinals in new places, it was really as a nod to those places to say, you know, you're an important part of the church, right? And it's not simply for the person or their beliefs, right? I mean, they all believe in the faith, but to raise up this kind of far-flung church. And that doesn't mean, as we were saying, that all these new cardinals that Pope Francis has named are all in lockstep with him.
We're looking at live pictures right now from the Vatican as we await the cardinals making that famous procession from the Pauline Chapel to the Sistine Chapel, not far from where they are right now. You can see the Swiss Guard outside the chapel. Inside, you can see the tables are now set. They line the room, and in front of each chair there is the name of one of the 113 cardinals, 133 cardinals that will be deciding the next pope. And again, we mentioned that 108 of them have been appointed by Pope Francis along the way. 5 of the electors were appointed by Pope John Paul II, 22 by Pope Benedict, and again, 108 by Pope Francis. You have to be under 80 to actually be inside that room. And Father Martin, what's the reasoning behind that? I know that that change came, what, in 1970 or so? And what were they trying to accomplish there?
Yeah, I think to avoid, what you might call a gerontocracy, where the oldest of the old are the ones that have a say. And it's a nod. I mean, in the church, under 80 is considered young. It's a nod to having something of a more youthful composition of the electors, and also, with an eye to, just having someone who's also mentally there.
They're in the Pauline Chapel right now, and you can see in both of these chapels the magnificent work of Michelangelo. They'll actually make their decision in the coming days in the shadow of the Last Judgment inside the Sistine Chapel. That's where they'll give their oath a short time from now, that they will make sure that this process remains secretive. And in fact, it was Pope Benedict who, in his writings, made sure that everyone involved in these conclaves knows the threat of excommunication if any of it is leaked. They've swept the chapel for any sort of electric devices to make sure that there is no way that folks can listen in from the outside world. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the cardinals have had to give up their phones, any form of communication. A little bit later here, we'll hear from New York City's Cardinal Timothy Dolan. He put out a video statement a short time ago that says, this is probably the last time I'll be able to talk with you for a few days, building up that anticipation, but also driving home the point that these cardinals have now been sealed off, essentially, from the rest of the world. And James Longman, I know you can see these pictures right along with us. You have been here at the Vatican for many days now, and you can see the weight of the decision that they soon face in the faces of these cardinals.
Yeah, David, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think people imagine conclave to be a kind of a political meeting where there's a lot of talking that goes on. Actually, it's a spiritual moment for these men. The kind of conversation, the bartering, if you like, has already gone on in the last 2 weeks of congregation. And it's been really important for these men to get to know each other. I have been trying to find out as best I can what's in their minds and in their hearts. Very difficult to read, but we've been chasing them down as they've been coming out behind me across the square. The area they've been meeting actually is just to the left of the Basilica as you look at it, and they've been coming back out into Rome every night. We know last night they got their last chance to kind of have a normal life, if you like. We heard that they were going out to their favorite restaurants for some of that food they may not get when they're sequestered. Last haircuts as well, bit of normal life before they return to this very, very important spiritual heavy moment for them to really kind of look into their souls to find out who they believe should be the next pope. And not just that, who the Holy Spirit is telling them should be the next pope. That's how they see it. That's what they said to me as they came out. And look, I was looking for clues. I don't think any individual is necessarily in the minds of the men I spoke to, but the kind of man they're looking for, that I think they have settled on. Because we've heard it, actually, from the bulletin that was actually published yesterday. They issued this kind of report on the congregations, on where their heads were at. And they spoke about a man of the church. They spoke about a pontifex, a builder of bridges, which is what that means literally, a shepherd, a master of humanity. And I'll send you back to the funeral of Pope Francis and that homily from the Dean of the Cardinals, Battista Re, when he said the words that the church should be a field hospital. That got a round of applause here. And the Cardinals will have heard that. So this is very much about finding a man like Francis in the way that he was personable, but not necessarily particularly on the direction he took the church. It's a very fine balance. David?
Yeah, those were extraordinary clues, and it wasn't easy, James. For those watching back in the U.S., talk to them a little bit about your interactions with these cardinals. You tried your best, but it also showed that they too take this very seriously. They were guarded and very careful with their words, and some messaging to you that there wasn't much they could say.
No, absolutely. And I think probably, David, because they don't know. If you think back to 2005, there was a sense in the dean, the College of Cardinals back then, that perhaps the name of Ratzinger, who then became Benedict, that was on their minds already. But I think this time the sense I was getting was they don't know. I mean, we would wait outside the gates there as they came out. The cardinals, many of them living in and out in Rome in various different houses and lodgings, in spiritual orders, religious orders as well. And they've taken this time to really get to know each other and hear from each other in these congregations about the main issues that are facing the church. And there have been some bombs dropped, I'll be honest, David, in these congregations. Pope Francis, before he became Pope Francis, when he was Cardinal Bergoglio, when he spoke at his congregation, that was the moment, it is reported, that turned the minds of the cardinals, that showed him to be someone actually that could be a pope. He was named as one of the possible frontrunners, but he very much was not at the top of the list. And it changed for him. It sent him into the conclave as someone that was at the front of their minds. Similarly, this week, what we're hearing is some of these frontrunners, and we don't have to go through all their names necessarily, whilst they might be the frontrunners in the press and in the bookies, they might not necessarily be the frontrunners for these men because of what's gone on in congregations. They may have ruined their chances, not improved them. So much has gone on in these congregations. That's where these men have really kind of been getting to know each other, understanding their positions on the main issues that face the church, unity of the church, the sex abuse scandal that we know has rocked it, synodality, the idea that more lay people should be involved in the church. These are the issues they've been thinking about, and now they're waiting for the Holy Spirit to tell them what they should do. David.
Our chief international correspondent, James Longman, right down on the square, St. Peter's Square for us, watching this unfold here. The majestic view, really, from inside this area of the Vatican, where you will see the procession from the Pauline Chapel over to the Sistine Chapel. And Terry Moran's with us here as well. And Terry, you heard James Longman talk about these general congregations, these meetings leading up to the Vatican. And while many of these cardinals don't know each other well, they've had a lot of time together, certainly in these last few days. And it was during this similar time period, during the last conclave, that James points out that Pope Francis actually, what he said landed with the cardinals.
It did, and it was reported that he said, look, we're talking about our own internal issues. We have to go out into the world. We've got the good news, the gospel, and we need to bring it to the people at the far margins, at the peripheries. And it was a simple statement that really did move hearts and minds, it seems, and that's how Pope Francis was elected. We may see something similar this time.
Terry, thank you. We're now watching Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who, of course, was Pope Francis's Secretary of State. He will preside over this conclave. He's preparing them for the procession into the Sistine Chapel. And Father Martin, the Dean of the College of Cardinals, Giovanni Battista Re, of course, is older than 80, and his deputies also over 80 as well, which is why we're seeing Cardinal Parolin right here.
Yeah, and it falls to him as Secretary of State to lead this this ritual that is steeped in lots of tradition. Also, he's interestingly mentioned by many people as possible papabile, someone who could be a possible pope.
Again, the cardinals have gathered in the Pauline Chapel, of course, in the Apostolic Palace. The Pauline Chapel, by the way, is at the top of the grand staircase of the papal residence, which separates, of course, the Pauline Chapel from the Sistine Chapel. And let's listen as this procession begins. Sancta Trinitas Unus Deus, miserere nobis, Santa Maria, ora pro nobis, Santa Dei Membris, ora pro nobis, Santa Virgo Virginum, ora pro nobis, Sancti Michael et You'll remember this from the funeral for Pope Francis as well. They are praying the Litany of the Saints, and we're watching the procession begin. The cross there at the beginning. They're making their way now to the Sistine Chapel.
sort of in reverse seniority. And of course, Cardinal Parolin will be at the end of the procession. And again, he will be leading much of what we see today. The Litany of the Saints, they're basically reaching out to the saints and asking them to pray for them.
They are, and you know, David, people who watch the funeral will notice a small change during the funeral. The Litany of the Saints, the response was, pray for him, pray for Francis. And the response today is ora pro nobis, pray for us. And so they're asking the saints to help them with their prayers as they embark on this awesome task.
And it's remarkable to think, Father Martin, that as you look at this solemn procession and the weight of this decision that they will soon make, that these men know that among them is the next pope.
That's right. And as they say, the Holy Spirit knows. They just have to figure it out. They have to discern. I really do love this Litany of the Saints. It's something that it would have been played at their ordinations, sung at their ordinations, and it is this beseeching of the saints to help them with their prayers. And so they're reaching out to many of the saints, some of whom had been popes in their day.
Just to try to get into the minds of some of these cardinals, and I know I'm not asking you to be sort of an armchair psychologist, but maybe I am. There have got to be sort of hopes among them that perhaps I'll be considered. But you can't be public about it. You can't campaign, if you will, the way we're used to campaigning back in the United States. It's far more subtle in the way they go about deciding who might be a leader to meet this moment for the church.
I think oftentimes the statement is made that anyone who wants it going in leaves it as a cardinal, right? I think generally they're looking at other people who they may want to point others to. And so that's why these general congregations have been so important, to look at other people and to say, have you considered this cardinal or that cardinal? But yeah, I think anyone who wants it is, and certainly expresses it, is almost automatically disqualified.
Father John Walk is also with us for our coverage here this morning. And Father Walk, your thoughts as you watch this procession.
Hello.
Father Walk, it's David
What we're
Muir.
watching
You're
is
on
simply
the air with us, and
what we're watching is the cardinals and now are entering from the Sala Regia. They're passing into the Sistine Chapel, going from one set of frescoes by Michelangelo to another set of frescoes. It's a rare moment when a bunch of elderly men can upstage the artwork of Michelangelo, but the conclave is that moment.
And Father Walk, the weight of the moment, the history that they will soon make, they must sense that as they enter the Sistine Chapel.
Almost everything that we're seeing today, really from the Mass this morning to this procession, the Litany of the Saints, it's all designed to impress upon the cardinals the spiritual importance of what they're about to do. This invocation of the saints is a reminder that the whole church, including the church in heaven, is watching them. And they're going to be in front of the Last Judgment fresco of Michelangelo, thinking about their responsibility before God. They're going to take oaths. They're dressed in liturgical garments, as if they were going to Mass. This is a spiritual event for them, but also for the entire church, and the entire church is watching.
As Father Walk points out, wearing choir dress, the most formal of what they have, marking this occasion and the significance of what we're watching play out here. It was Pope John Paul II who was the first pope to actually specify that a conclave must take place in the Sistine Chapel. Before that, it had only been recommended, and obviously through the centuries, the conclaves have been held in multiple locations. But Father Walk points out that they will make this decision, and whether it comes today, tomorrow, in the coming days, likely not today, though there will be one vote later this afternoon, they will do it, Linsey, in the shadow of the Last Judgment.
And as you mentioned, that first vote that takes place today, traditionally that is largely symbolic. That's really to give a nod to the most senior, perhaps revered of the elder members of the College of Cardinals. It is interesting, as you point out, the last 100 years this is taking place inside the Sistine Chapel. The hope is that people will rely less on the politics of the moment and really be more mindful of the Holy Spirit and be moved by God in their decision to choose the 267th Pope in this scenario. What's interesting, Latin, pontiff means bridge. And a number of the people we've talked to say that that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a bridge. They're looking for a shepherd. They're looking for hope.
The first conclave here in the Sistine Chapel was actually back in 1492. And as I mentioned, they've been held throughout Rome, outside the chapel, sometimes outside the Vatican altogether. Once this procession ends here, and this is again 133 cardinals who will take place in electing the new pope. 135 of them were eligible, meaning under the age of 80. 2 could not attend. 133 of them, 108 of those 133 actually named by Pope Francis. You can see them bowing at the altar. A short time from now, they will take an oath as a group. And in that oath will come the words of the importance of the promise to observe the importance of this and the secrecy of this within the church. And in fact, once all of this is done, Father Martin, the tallies of each one of these votes, and again, the first one, as Linsey points out, is this afternoon. Oftentimes it can be symbolic. It could have names of cardinals that then don't show up in the subsequent rounds of voting. But all of the tallies are then sealed, and it's only the new pope who can give any sort of permission to ever go public with the numbers that they saw inside that room in the initial days of the conclave.
That's right. It's to give them perfect freedom. They are burned in order to destroy all the evidence of the vote. Interestingly, I heard a Vatican insider say to me the other day that the first ballot is almost like a primary, if you think about it. It raises different names, 4 or 5 names of people to sort of sense how much support they have. And then as the balloting goes on, you see who has support, who has been blocked maybe, and then maybe if sort of a compromised candidate has to come up. But yeah, it's supposed to be in total secrecy. And again, this is it's a holy event, and we want everyone to be able to express themselves freely without, being afraid that they're going to be reported on later on.
And there you see at the end of the procession, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. He is considered by many to be one of the contenders potentially to be the next pope. He was Pope Francis's Secretary of State. He's presiding over the conclave because the Dean of Cardinals obviously is older than 80 years old. Cardinal Ray did preside over the funeral mass for Pope Francis that we brought to you back in the States just a few days back here at the Vatican. Terry Moran, they have entered the Sistine Chapel. And as Father Martin said, you've said it before as well, that first vote can sometimes feel like a primary, an early vote, a signal of respect for some of those cardinals who might not make it to the final votes. But it is deeply moving, and some of the cardinals say surprisingly quiet. This is not like a political convention at all inside the Sistine Chapel. In fact, one cardinal once said, if you were inside, you might be bored to tears.
It is a sacred moment, isn't it, David? I mean, I'm thinking about these cardinals who, when they were young men, gave their lives in the service of the church, in the service of God and the Christian faith. And here, this may be the most important thing they ever do, the most important task that they ever have. The weight of it is on their shoulders. You can see it in their faces, and yet it's also, in its way, a thrilling moment. This is an opportunity, a fascinating opportunity. I'm thinking back to 2013 when the conclave selected Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis, and think how much the world has changed in just 12 years. Politically and culturally, technologically, the church itself, what the world needs from the church. And the global nature of it, really, the Pope is a global leader unlike anyone else. This is a global conclave unlike anything else. The questions they're sorting through in their hearts and in their prayers are so different. Such a challenge, so much opportunity. It's really fascinating.
Terry, thank you. And of course, the timing of this, so many of our viewers back in the United States, every time one of these conclaves comes around, the questions are somewhat familiar, which is how long could it take? And there's simply no way of knowing. We had one cardinal say to our James Longman again, if this extends beyond Friday, there were surprises here. Some of the cardinals have hinted that it might not take that long. But again, Father Martin, anyone who says they know doesn't know.
No, and the cardinals aren't talking. And I've met with a couple of cardinals just informally, and they're not saying anything. And, you know, while the Italian press and the worldwide press has their favorites, you really don't know what's going on inside the heart and the mind of an individual cardinal. I think, again, you know, as Father Walker was saying, they're doing this under the gaze of Jesus Christ in Michelangelo's Last Judgment, and they just came out of the Pauline Chapel where they saw the conversion of Paul and the crucifixion of Peter. So even the visuals are going to remind them, you know, of what an important task this is.
The Litany of the Saints continues, and let's listen here for a moment as we approach the oath they'll take as a group. We saw there a moment ago Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, of course, from the Philippines, bow there, and there's been a lot of attention, Father Martin, about Cardinal Tagle from the Philippines. Many have dubbed him sort of the Asian Francis, very popular back in the Philippines and also considered a contender here.
Yeah, I think it's fair to call him the Asian Francis. We don't want to reduce him to simply a carbon copy of Francis, but he's very ebullient, he's cheerful, he's a great evangelizer, he's very well loved in the Philippines. He's known for his sunny demeanor. He also has some experience in the Vatican, so certainly a contender.
They will sing Veni Creator Spiritus, of course, invoking the presence of the Holy Spirit here. As a group, they will do this after the Litany of the Saints. And then, of course, there'll be a moment of prayer. Then the oath that they will take as a group, and then individually, one by one, they will place their hand at the altar in front of the room and put words to their promise to keep this secret and to promise that they will choose the person who they believe would best lead the church. This is a live picture. You see the Swiss Guard there just outside the doors of the Sistine Chapel. Of course, those doors will remain open not too much longer here before those doors actually are closed. And there was a time when they would go into the Sistine Chapel and not emerge until there was a new pope. Obviously, they now go in at the beginning of the day. There are 2 votes in the morning. And if they don't have a 2/3 majority, they take a break for lunch, come back in the afternoon. Additional prayer, and then vote again. Each vote can take up to 90 minutes or so because it's each individual cardinal writing their choice on the ballot. The ballot that has Latin on it and essentially says, I am choosing this person, and they write it in themselves, which cardinal they're choosing to be the Supreme Pontiff, the leader of the Catholic Church. And they write purposefully in penmanship that can't be traced back to them, which I find to be so, well, medieval, if you will, Lindsay, knowing that that's actually going to get burned in one of the 2 stoves in the Sistine Chapel a short time later anyway.
Just so clandestine. I think that's what part of what builds the suspense and mystery. Really sounds like the makings for a major blockbuster movie. Somebody ought to get the script for that together. But you mentioned Tagle, Cardinal Tagle. He would be the first pope from Asia. Of course, you've had 213 of the last popes, 266, who have all been from Italy. So this would be quite a shift. He's known for his charismatic preaching, his ability to attract young people. He even has a broadcast that he does in the Philippines and frequently appears on social media. David, of course, you and I have had our share of covering elections, but there is none quite like this one. When you think about the magnitude of very possibly the most powerful position in the church, in the world, and really picking up that cultural megaphone that Pope Francis held, where he gave support to women, to migrants, to the poor, to members of the LGBTQ community and the environment. Suffices to say, big shoes to fill.
Enormous shoes to fill, and of course Cardinal Tagle is one of several who are considered very strong contenders. He's also known for his karaoke, Linsey,
Yes.
Apparently back in the
Oh,
Philippines.
little John Legend, John Lennon.
Yeah, the John Lennon song.
trouble.
Yeah, it did get him, but he chose a few words to leave out when he performed that song.
He's very informal. I was at the table with him at the Synod last year, and we went around the table saying, what would you like us to call you? And he said, call me Chito. That's his name. And I said to him, I cannot call you Chito.
No.
And he said, no, I insist. So he's very down to earth.
Very down to earth, and that is what he is known as, certainly back in the Philippines. Linsey brings up a good point, which is they all have to quietly, look within themselves to decide which direction to take the Catholic Church in. They have to decide a pope who will meet this moment as we look around the world, the global conflict, the political balance, if you will, and decide who might be best to take the Church forward, and whether or not they do so in a similar way to Pope Francis is one of the major questions going into this conclave. Obviously, Pope Francis wanted to make his papacy about the people at the periphery, on the margins, and he spoke of that. He spoke of that in the days leading up to the last conclave, that we have to, as a church, reach out to people. That is what the church faces. It's existential, that we have to grow the church and we have to reach people and make sure that they feel seen and feel heard. The question is whether or not they continue in that direction, and perhaps they'll do that, but with a different sort of list of issues that are most important.
That's right, and Pope Francis was doing what Jesus did, which is to reach out to people on the margins, people who felt excluded, to the peripheries, as Francis said. But as you were saying, David, it's a different world than it was in 2013. And a number of cardinals said to me, we're not picking a pope for 2013, we're picking a pope for 2025. And that weighs on them as well. What has happened in the last 12 years in the world and in the church, that'll certainly weigh on their decisions.
Terry Moran, we heard from Cardinal Timothy Dolan, who said that he might bring a book about Michelangelo into the Sistine Chapel and spend some time reading, because there are long periods of silence during these votes. And again, as I mentioned, they can take up to an hour and a half for each individual cardinal to write out their choice and then to bring that choice to the front of the room, to place it in that urn. We've seen the camera trained on that urn a couple of times. The power of Michelangelo in that room. We'll come back to you, Terry, in just a moment. Let's listen in as this continues inside. They're going to pray as a group right after they sing here, Veni Creator Spiritus. Again, invoking the presence of the Holy Spirit. They will sing as a group here.
Veni Creator Spiritus. Oremus.
The cardinals will now take an oath as a group. This is Cardinal Papal, of course, the Secretary of State, presiding, and we have a translator for the Latin.
Veritatis et pacis. Ut que tibi placit assunt, toto corde cognoscant, et agnita tota virtute sectentur, per Christum Dominum nostrum.
That's the last prayer. That's not the oath.
Of course, the oath that they will swear together as a group and then individually promises to keep the secrecy regarding everything in any way that relates to the election of the new Pope. Let's listen.
Each and every one of the cardinal electors engaged in this election of the Supreme Pontiff promise, vow, and swear that we will inviolably and scrupulously observe with faith and diligence all that is contained in the Apostolic Constitution of the Supreme Pontiff John Paul II, which begins with the words Universi Dominici Gregis, issued on the 22nd day of February in the year 1996, together with the changes made to it through the apostolic letter Normas Non Nullas, given motu proprio by the Supreme Pontiff Benedict XVI, on the 22nd day of February in the year 2013. Likewise, we promise, vow, and swear that whichever of us, by divine disposition, shall be elected Roman Pontiff, will faithfully carry out the Petrine ministry of pastor of the Universal Church, and will never fail to affirm and defend strenuously the spiritual and temporal rights and the liberty of the Holy See. Above all, we promise and swear to observe with the utmost fidelity and with all, whether clerics or lay people, secrecy regarding everything that in any way pertains to the election of the Roman Pontiff, and regarding what takes place in the place of election, directly or indirectly concerning the scrutiny, not to break this same secrecy in any way, either during or after the election of the new pontiff, unless explicit authorization has been granted by the same pontiff. And likewise, we swear never to lend support or favor to any interference, opposition, or any other form of intervention whereby secular authorities of any order or degree, or any group of people or individuals, might wish to intervene in the election of the Roman Pontiff.
Et ego Petrus cardinalis Parolin spondeo voveo ac iuro. Sic me Deus adiuvet, et ex Santa Dei Evangelia
Parolin, who is presiding over the oath as a group, and now each individual cardinal will place their hand on the book of Gospels and deliver their oath as well to uphold the secrecy of the conclave. And there you see it at the front of the chapel, right there, Father.
Yes, it is quite something to have Jesus Christ in judgment looking down on you as you make your oath. I don't think you could get any more solemn than that in putting your hand on the book of the Gospels.
Ferdinandus cardinalis Filoni spondeo voveo ac iuro.
As you can hear there, one by one, they'll stand before that book, and they will say their own name and say, "I do so promise, pledge, and swear," placing their hand on the Gospels, saying, "So help me God," and these holy Gospels, which I touch with my hand. Of course, this is Cardinal Tagle from the Philippines, widely considered to be in the running to become next Pope. And again, I'm very careful to say that because there's also the saying, if you enter a Pope, you come out a Cardinal.
That's exactly right. And I think the Cardinals know that better than anyone. They know not to get their heads ahead of them.
This is Cardinal Prevost from America, the United States, born in Chicago.
Etego Luis Rafael Cardinale Sacco, spondeo, boveo acuro, sic me Deus ad Juve, et heb sancta de Evangelia, que manu mea tango.
And Terry Moran, you can see in the faces of these cardinals the profound weight of the words, swearing their oath to uphold the secrecy of these proceedings.
It is a solemn moment, David. There's no question about it. And as you say, you can see that. This is also a sacred ceremony, isn't it? It is core part of their faith, and it's all on the line as they take this oath. The responsibility they have to look into their conscience and their understanding of the world and the church and make the best decision they can, and then their responsibility to keep it secret, to keep the deliberations secret. And I was also struck by the passage that they swear not to let any secular outside power or influence affect their votes. Obviously, that's been a problem in the church at various times in its long history. But I was also thinking that this is the Constitution that Pope St. John Paul II put in. He knew what it was like to practice his faith, to lead a flock under communism in Poland, knew what secular influence could be, and here it is in this oath. It needs to be about this church, the people of God, and the best decision that they can make for it.
Terry, we're looking at Cardinal Peter Erdu of Hungary, been an archbishop there since 2002. 71 years old, born in Budapest during communist rule. And Father Martin, he also was considered a potential contender here.
He is, I would say, slightly on the more traditional side. Cardinal Erdo has been seen as a kind of a candidate that might draw together some people who would like to, maybe make their church a little more traditional and pull back a little bit from some of Pope Francis's reforms.
Espondio bovio juro sic me Deus adjuvet et ex sancta Dei Evangelia per manum mea tango.
You're about to see Cardinal Daniel DiNardo of the United States as well, 75 years old. There you hear him say his name. Born in Steubenville, Ohio. He is the retired Archbishop of Galveston, Houston. In fact, there are 10 cardinals from the United States who are delivering their oath as 10 cardinals of the 133 who will soon be sequestered inside the Sistine Chapel. Of course, when the oaths are completed, it's not long after we hear those words, extra omnes, which means essentially everybody out.
David, you mentioned those cardinals from America, but never a pope from America. That also would be a first, though not necessarily on the bingo card. But as we're hearing the echo here, this is being broadcast live in St. Peter's Square. And as Terry mentioned, despite all the pomp and pageantry here, there really is such a solemn moment. And if we look at the root meaning in Latin of conclave, it means conclave, with key, of course, reflecting the secrecy of these cardinals ultimately being locked into place. But until then, in the last few moments here, as they pontificate about the next pontificate, certainly down to prayer at this point. All the politicking while they're in this room will be over.
And it does begin, Linsey, after the oaths, the singular oaths of each one of these cardinals is delivered.
Et ego Leonardus Cardinalis Marx, spondeo vovio ac juro, sic me Deus adjuvet, et ex sancta Dei Evangelia, que manu mea tango.
Et ego João Brás Cardinalis Diabis, spondeo vovio ac juro, sic me Deus adjuvet et eco sancta Evangelia, que manu mea tango.
Et ego Thomas Cardinalis Collins, spondeo vovio et juro, sic me Deus adjuvet, et ex sancta Dei Evangelia, que manu mea tango.
Et ego Willem Jacobus Cardinalis Eijk, spondeo vovio.
You're hearing Cardinal Willem Jacobus Eijk of the Netherlands, considered to be a potential contender for the next Pope, 71 years old, raised by a Protestant father and Catholic mother.
Et ego Joseph Cardinalis Betori, spondeo vovio ac juro.
And you can see behind the cardinal currently delivering the oath, that's Timothy Dolan standing behind him. Obviously well known back in the United States, the cardinal from New York City, born in St. Louis, Missouri. Let's listen.
Sic me Deus adjuvet et haec sancta Dei Evangelia, que manu mea tango.
Et ego Rainer Maria Cardinalis Wölki, spondeo voveo ac juro, sic me Deus adjuvet et haec sancta Dei Evangelia, que muna mea tango.
Et ego Jacobis Cardinalis Harvey, spondeo roveo ac juro, sic me Deus adjuvet.
This is Cardinal Michael Harvey, born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was ordained by Pope Paul VI, later entering the Vatican's diplomatic service.
Cardinalis Clemis, spondeo voveo ac juro, sic me Deus adjuvet, et haec sancta Dei Evangelia,
So many reading there in Italian, but what is so interesting is that once they're inside the conclave, there is no translator. And not everyone obviously speaks Italian fluently, and so it's interesting that in these congregations, the meetings that have been taking place along the edges prior to this day, in many cases people talk simply to people who can speak their own language, right? And that language might be literally, but also as far as the direction of the church. But again, regardless of where you are in the world, there are so many millions who feel connected to this centuries-old event.
But of course, speaking Italian is almost a prerequisite if you're going to be the next pope, obviously.
Well, that's right, and a lot of people have been looking at who speaks Italian. There was much kind of commentary, I won't say who, with a cardinal who just celebrated his first public mass in Italian. Another cardinal said he doesn't speak Italian, and he is happy that he doesn't speak Italian, so that takes him off the list. But they are looking for someone who is, I think, at least well-versed in Italian language and the Vatican culture here.
Sic me Deus adjuvet, et ex sancta Dei Evangelia, que manu mea tango.
And turning around, we talked about the congregations leading up to this moment. Once the Sistine Chapel and the conclave begins, and as Linsey mentioned, Latin for, with key, they lock up the doors of the Sistine Chapel and you're inside. There isn't a grand amount of drama. There isn't a cardinal who suddenly stands and becomes sort of a kingmaker, turning their vote in one direction or the other, taking them over that sort of two-thirds threshold. Instead, it's quiet, it's thoughtful, it's a chapel filled with prayer. And so these congregations where these cardinals have met and gathered and talked in the days preceding the conclave are extraordinarily important.
They sure are. And that difference that you just outlined, in the congregations, there are meetings of the cardinals in the days leading up to the conclave. They do exchange ideas. They do make their case for a direction that the church might take or an issue that the church should take up. But in the Sistine Chapel, it's not. There's an old Hollywood version of a conclave in the movie The Shoes of the Fisherman with Anthony Quinn, where somebody stands up and starts shouting, making a big speech. That doesn't happen. One of the things that we've heard cardinals say here as we kind of buttonholed them as they made their way into those congregations is the word discern. They're trying to figure out what the church needs, and in their belief, what the Holy Spirit is guiding them to do. It's a more contemplative, for many of them, a more contemplative operation of the mind and heart, rather than the kind of brawny politicking we're used to in conventions and campaigns in the United States. It's a unique election.
Now, after they actually have the morning and the afternoon voting sessions, Terry, they are allowed to speak with one another. They just can't speak with the outside world.
That's right, and that is where I imagine, if you saw the movie Conclave, which is the more recent version of it, that there is something like that in those in-between the votes, in between their times in the Sistine Chapel. They are discussing who's ahead, how much strength one person might have, the interests that they might share with people with cardinals from other places or other traditions. And that is where you'll have good discussions and a little bit of old-fashioned politics.
Father Martin, we're seeing the cardinal there who is next. That's Cardinal Charles Mongbo from Myanmar, 76 years old, the same age as Pope Francis, and Francis made him Myanmar's first ever cardinal in 2015.
Yeah, he's a lovely guy. He was also at the Synod. I got to know him a little bit. Very soft-spoken, quiet, friendly, smiling. I think if he were made Pope, who knows, he'd be a good evangelizer and someone who I think could really make good contact with people around the world.
James Longman, who is down in St. Peter's Square, also watching the individual oaths here to uphold the secrecy of this conclave. And James was assigned with the task over these last few days of interacting with the cardinals the best he could as they left the congregations, these meetings that were being had after Pope Francis's funeral, and in that window of time before the conclave, to get a chance to know one another, and where those conversations, we talk about the sort of politicking, the making of the case, if you will, and it's more often than not, James, fellow cardinals who will suggest one of their peers and say this might be a good idea or a strong idea for the church to meet this moment, rather than the cardinal themselves walking up to others saying, vote for me.
Yeah, it was described to me as a process of elimination, David. If not him, then not him, then not him, then perhaps him. And that's absolutely how this works. The moment someone comes forward themselves, that would rule them out, I think it's fair to say. We're watching these men come forward now, and I'm just struck by the faces we're seeing. This underlines the diverse nature of Francis's church. Each one of these men coming forward, giving this Latin oath. And this is the most diverse conclave that we have ever seen. There are 23 Asian cardinals taking part in this. There were only 10 for the last two conclaves, 18 from Africa, only 11 in the last two. But I also think it's important to underline to people watching at home that diversity doesn't necessarily cut along the same progressive conservative line that people might imagine. And that means that conservative progressive is an oversimplification of these groups of men here. There's so much more at play. It will come down to the individual as each individual comes forward to give this oath.
James, thank you. The bells tolling here behind us in St. Peter's Square. And next up right here, this is Cardinal Carlos Serra of Spain. He's actually the oldest cardinal to take part in this conclave. He turns 80 next week. So he got in just by about a week's time, Father Martin.
Yes, I'm sure he's very happy about that. Cardinals often will tell you that this is the most important thing they do. When a person is named a cardinal, that's what's on their mind, that they will be charged with electing the next pope.
As James points out, this is the most diverse conclave that we have witnessed. 53 of the cardinals in that room still hail from Europe, 16 from North America, 4 from Central America, 17 from South America, and as James points out, 18 from Africa, 23 from Asia, which was truly reflective of Pope Francis and one of his goals, which was to extend the church to every corner of the world. As they swear their oath to secrecy, Linsey, we heard from Timothy Dolan from New York City, Cardinal Dolan, and his final message. You see the door still open to the Sistine Chapel with the Swiss Guard, not for much longer, but Cardinal Dolan saying, "This is the last time you'll be hearing from me, perhaps for several days." Each one of these cardinals, and many of them, communicate through social media. They very much know the tools to reach the faithful in this moment. But those tools are put away. We are returned to sort of medieval times, if you will, a church that's 2,000 years old, and they'll decide who the next pope is in very similar ways that they decided centuries ago.
And not only is the Sistine Chapel swept for all the kinds of electronic devices that might be used to communicate, but also Santa Marta, where they're staying. The same is true there. They can communicate only with each other by phone.
I just want to point out here, Linsey, this is Cardinal Joseph Tobin, for those who are watching back in the States. Born in Detroit, Michigan, he's the Archbishop of Newark, New Jersey, and has been the Archbishop there since 2016. But to the technology point of this, they have swept the chapel, and they've made sure there's no way for anyone to listen in.
And those who are even working with them inside Santa Marta, well, they will go back and take lunch breaks and a siesta, something I think we should all incorporate a little bit more into our lives. But the people who are cooking, who are doing any kind of preparation, they're also sworn to secrecy from anything that they might observe. You know, one thing I was thinking of as we're hearing many of the men make their oaths at this point is the backdrop of the, I'm going to give it back to you, David, here.
Yeah, this was Cardinal Anders Eberelius of Sweden. In an interview, he said, "I always say we need what the world cannot give us, holiness." And he has said that if we don't have a new pope by the end of the week, then something happened here. And there'll be quite a storyline, I'm sure, that would emerge. When asked whether or not he was a contender, he said, "I must confess," this is what he told ABC News, "I was so shocked that there might be some single people who would like it, but it's very unlikely that they will choose someone from the secular and northern part of Europe." Do you think that's the case, Father Martin?
I think it's unlikely, but it's possible. He's seen as a very moderate person, a very kind person, a good evangelizer. And actually the fact that he is in a place where Catholics are in the minority might sort of recommend his candidacy to other people.
It seems, though, that modesty is the way when a cardinal is asked, "Do you think you're going to be the next pope?" I mean, I think there's only one way to answer that.
Yeah, I think if anyone says yes, or I should be, or I will be, he's disqualified. I know many of these people, and they are very humble people, and often many of them, they don't want to be pope. It's an awesome responsibility, and so this is not kind of false humility or false protestation.
Pope Francis famously said that he was surprised that he was chosen as the next pope. You know, he did well during the conclave where Pope Benedict emerged as the next pope, obviously. But several years later, Pope Francis was older, and he famously had his suitcase, his small suitcase, and the return ticket. He was ready to go home. He had no idea he wouldn't be leaving.
Yeah, he thought he was too old. As you said in the conclave before that, he was number 2 after Benedict, but by 2013, he thought his time was done, and he had already had his retirement picked out. So I think it's also one of the wonderful things about Francis is that because he didn't want it and didn't cling to it, he was very free when he finally received that election.
Linsey was talking about the residence where they are all staying, which is sort of the guest house, if you will, and Pope Francis also stayed there as a cardinal and chose to never leave.
Yeah, he didn't want to stay in the Grand Apostolic Palace. He said it would be like a cage for him. Now, the open question is whether or not his successor will move back, because Casa Santa Marta, while very homey and very friendly, is also a guest house. And, you know, you would eat in the cafeteria, and the Pope would see people on the elevator. And, you know, the next Pope may not want that. And I think that would be perfectly fine if he decides to move back into a more formal residence.
Yes, we joked during our coverage back during the funeral, who are we to judge, right? If the Pope decides they want to move back into the Grand Papal Residence, it just wasn't for Pope Francis. And I think that that's what a lot of Catholics around the world were drawn to. This is Fridolin Mbongo Basungi. It's Cardinal Basungu from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And again, this speaks to the diversity of the church. He did break with Francis, though, after Francis signed off on a declaration allowing for priests to bless individuals in same-sex relationships. Cardinal Basungo came out with a statement saying no blessing for homosexual couples in the African churches. So again, Pope Francis expanding the reach of the church, but as James Longman pointed out just moments ago here, it does not mean that in those far corners where the Catholic Church is now represented and the people are heard, that they necessarily think and believe along the same lines as Pope Francis. Cardinal Zuppi from Italy is coming up next here. The Archbishop of Bologna, Italy since 2015, also currently the president of the Italian Bishops' Conference. Like Francis, he's known as a street priest.
Yeah, he's been mentioned for years as a possible successor to Francis. He's very much affiliated with what's called the San Egidio movement in Italy and worldwide, which is a group that works with the poor and works for peace and justice. And he went from being a street priest, working with sort of migrants and refugees, to being archbishop and now being cardinal.
How likely is it we would have an Italian pope? I know that one of the reasons, and this was years back, that there was this effort to get beyond Italy, to get beyond Europe, to have popes from other parts of the world, and now we have had that. We had history with Pope Francis. But what do you think the chances are that there would be an Italian pope?
I think they're pretty high. If the Italians vote as a bloc, if people see an Italian pope as a path to stability, one of the arguments is we Italians here in the Vatican know how these things run. The Vatican is still kind of largely Italian culture.
This is Cardinal Wilton Gregory, retired Archbishop of Washington. Born in Chicago, he's 77 years old, and I should note that he was sitting here in the booth a few years ago, back with Diane, for the previous conclave that named Pope Francis. So I think he has a better spot this time around, actually, inside the Sistine Chapel. He has influence now in deciding the next pope. But on this notion of an Italian pope, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's an open question. The question is whether or not the sort of appeal of an Italian pope as providing stability and understanding the culture would be countered by people from overseas who might say the last thing we need is someone who is an Italian because the church is moving towards the global south. So that's, you know, sort of pluses and minuses for an Italian pope.
Terry Moran, who's with us for the coverage as well, Terry, and just for people watching back home, now that this has begun and they're each delivering their oath, they will soon close the doors to the Sistine Chapel. There will be a first vote this afternoon. They have the stove inside the Sistine Chapel. There actually are two burners, one for the ballots themselves, and inside the other stove, they actually burn chemicals, Terry, because obviously, and as you know, they want to make sure, there's been such confusion in years past, they're going to make sure that that smoke looks discernible, that it's either white smoke or black smoke, and that the world knows. Back in 2005, when they had a new pope, people began to walk away because they thought the smoke was black that was emerging from that chimney. They had to get on the speakers here and say, no, 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 don't leave, we have a new pope.
That's right, and so while they want to keep that tradition, which is so much a part of the church, a charming tradition, really, that they take the ballots and they burn them on straw. They make the straw damp to make it darker. Well, that just didn't wasn't clear enough, especially given the cameras that can train on that chimney now. And so they make sure now, they add a little something in there to make sure the message is absolutely clear. And it is a thrill when it happens. When you see that white smoke, there's just an energy that tears through the square. People get up on their toes. People from around Rome come into the square, and then you're waiting. Then you don't know until they step out onto that balcony through those red velvet curtains. And that's when you finally know. It's just an amazing moment. We'll see that in the next couple of days.
It really will be amazing. And Terry, the time that elapses in between when they reach that two-thirds majority in the room, which again, the number that we'll be looking for obviously is the 89 votes gets you over that two-thirds threshold. There is time that then passes. Immediately the cardinal is asked, do you accept? And the answer is yes, no matter what the weight is, unless we're going to really make history this go around. And then they're taken into, Terry, what's called the Room of Tears, where already there are cassocks hanging in multiple sizes.
That's right, and that's Room of Tears because the responsibility is so great. It's been compared by some popes to the hill of Calvary where Christ was crucified. It's a walk that is almost painful to make. And there you see, there they are. They pick out the right size if they can find one. Sometimes it's not perfect, but it is the sign, that white cassock, that they are the Holy Father now. And it is quite a moment, perhaps moving them to tears.
Approaching the Book of Gospels there, that's Cardinal Sengo of Singapore, 67 years old. Pope Francis appointed him Archbishop of Singapore in 2013.
Yeah, and again, it's a reminder of how global the church is. And I think, as Terry was saying, just by looking at the faces, you see how international Pope Francis helped to make the College of Cardinals more reflective of where the church is today.
As Terry was saying, after a pope is chosen, they are then asked if they accept, then taken in to the Room of Tears, where they choose from the cassocks that are hanging in the closet. Also, as part of that, the shoes are in that room, and as we all know, Pope Francis and Pope John Paul II, before him, they both declined to wear some of the choices that were in that room to go with a more, modest sort of black leather shoe. This is Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa. Am I allowed to have a favorite name here, Father Martin?
That is a favorite name among many people, and someone told me if he is Pope, he shouldn't change his name.
I was going to say, when you're asked which name do you want to take, how on earth could you give that up?
I was going to say one thing to look for after the announcement of the person who was elected is what name they take. That's going to be a little bit of a signal of what kind of papacy the person wants, depending on who they name themselves after.
It's been said that Pope Francis, when he was asked which name you will take, one of his peers had said just beforehand, as they're paying homage to the new Pope inside that chapel, one of his peers said, "Don't forget the poor." And he said that was in his mind, and he thought of obviously St. Francis of Assisi, whose mission it was to reach people at the margins and the poor, people on the periphery. And so became Pope Francis.
That's right. And so depending on what we hear, if we hear, say, Pope John Paul III, it's someone who wants to follow in John Paul's legacy. I don't think we're going to hear Francis II. We could. But they always say, after saying accepto, I accept, his first big decision as Pope is what name to take. And that really communicates a little bit to the world of who he wants to be.
And remind me, Father Martin, how soon do we learn the name when they say Habemus Papam, right here at the balcony behind us, which they already have the velvet sort of curtains draped there in the famous balcony. When does the world learn the name that's been chosen?
Immediately after. So it's Habemus Papam, and then we hear the person's name. There's a Latin introduction, and they say Qui sibi nomen imposuit, who has taken the name. And then, as in last time they said Franciscum. And then the person comes out. So it's pretty dramatic. So a double-barreled announcement. Who is the new Pope, and what are we going to be calling him?
So that name was a real signal of what was coming because of what that name represented. But also a signal was when Pope Francis said, Buona sera, good evening to the faithful who were gathered in the square in such a sort of humble, modest, relatable way.
Yeah, very disarming, and then said, please pray for me, and bowed and prayed. And you can see the cardinals around him not knowing quite what to do because he was breaking with tradition, which sort of set the stage for his papacy.
And for as heavy as this is, Linsey, and the weight of this moment, swearing their oath to uphold the secrecy, the hard part for these cardinals actually comes next.
You're exactly right. And just back to that point of Pope Francis when he first emerged, it actually was Holy Thursday that he decided to go to a prison for young men and young women, which also signaled the departure from the kind of Pope that he would be and the humility that you spoke of. And he said that the church shouldn't serve as shaking a finger at people, but comforting them. And so I think that that's what makes him such the people's Pope. And that while I was looking at some of the descriptions of some of the people, one of them said that he is acceptable to many, loved by few. But Saint Francis, Pope Francis, pardon me, was loved by so many.
No question about that. And James Longman, I want to bring that notion to you because you've talked to many of the cardinals here, many of whom didn't want to get into where they were leaning or what they were thinking as far as the direction of the next pope. But it was clear in your conversations that we aired on World News Tonight that a number of them recognized the popularity, the ability for Pope Francis to connect on a level that will need to be met, and the humanity that he displayed as he traveled the world and in many cases to the far reaches of the world.
Yeah, David, I caught up actually with the Archbishop of Jakarta, and I said, what was it about Francis? Was it his faith? Was it the kind of man he was? Was it the direction he took in the church? He said quite simply, it was his simplicity. That was what Francis was about. And I think that's what I'm struck by watching these extraordinary pictures, David, because look at this. We're inside the Sistine Chapel, it's a 500-year-old building built really to kind of celebrate the power, the wealth of the church. These men are taking the oath in Latin, the ancient language of the church. Francis really was associated with all the other aspects of the church, the missionary church, the church that took all of this out into the world. Encontrar, he used to say, encounter. And so this is an interesting kind of contrast. These men will have it in their minds as well as they give this oath. Francis was heavily associated with Vatican II, which was a big reform of the church in the 60s, and that was what he was about, changing the church. So that will be on the minds of these men as they make their decision.
No question about that, James. And Pope Francis had talked about the image of Jesus knocking on the door to get in and said in many ways the church has to open the doors for us to get out into the world. And again, that will be regardless of whichever the issues are that are front and center for this next pope. And of course, the list is long, whether that be climate, LGBTQ community, the role of women in the church, sexual abuse, which still hasn't been completely obviously eradicated across the Catholic Church. There are so many issues that the church has to still contend with, Vatican finances and finances of the church globally, in fact. But one of the ways that you cannot argue is that Pope Francis was successful in reaching out and connecting on a very human level. And that's something that James heard just talking with that Archbishop and some of the cardinals he came in contact here with as well.
That's right. And as you were saying, it started from the get-go, from his bowing and his asking for people's prayers. You mentioned the washing of the feet on Holy Thursday, and also one of the first things he said in a press conference was how I want a church that is poor and for the church. And I'll tell you a funny story I just heard the other night from a Jesuit who knew him. When he was doing all these sort of surprising reforms and changes in their first few days, a friend said to him, boy, this is really something. And the Jesuit said, you haven't seen anything yet. So he was someone who wanted to make, as he said, a mess in the church, a good mess.
Yeah, and with some humor. And he started out with humor right there. I want to bring in Father John Walk again, who's with our coverage here today. And Father Walk, as we watch as each one of these cardinals delivers these solemn oaths to uphold the secrecy inside the Sistine Chapel, I'm curious if you think, Father, if many of these men have in their mind at least their first step, who they will vote for at least during this first ballot.
I imagine many of them do have an idea about their favorite candidate already. But I think they're also open to listening to the Holy Spirit. I think one of the things that we were seeing here with the hymn that was sung to the Holy Spirit, the oath of secrecy that they're taking, is the idea that the voice that these people should be listening to, the cardinals should be listening to, is the voice of the Holy Spirit. When they're trying to cut out all of the distractions. That's really what the secrecy and all these restrictions is about, to make sure that they're not listening to the wrong voices and to make it easier for them to listen to the Holy Spirit. And that's what they're going to try to do in these days.
And Father Walk, to listen from within is what they're agreeing to do here and not sharing it with the outside world. But in addition to that, how much of the conversation, once the conclave begins, once they start to see the numbers and the tallies at the end of each one of these votes, what then happens among this group of cardinals as far as conversation? I know not within the Sistine Chapel, but in those breaks in between. You know, we've all seen The Conclave, the recent movie, and there have been so many depictions along the way. But give our viewers back home in the United States a sense of the conversations that do take part once they see where the numbers are headed.
Well, I think during this week of the meetings that they call the congregations, before the conclave actually begins, is the time where they have a chance really to have open conversations with many different people about the issues that are facing the church, about different personalities and possible candidates. And probably during the actual the voting in the conclave, when they meet after the morning session, say, and they haven't elected someone, I think a lot of the discussion is going to be focused on what are realistic possibilities, right? Who has a real chance? Given the vote that we just saw, what is the possibility? And it's not going to be so much about the theoretical or global issues, but it's going to be about the realistic possibilities.
Father Walk, thank you. We're looking at Cardinal Dominique Momberti of France. He's the Cardinal Protodeacon. He'll be the one that goes to the balcony right here behind us and declares, Habemus Papam, we have a Pope. And that, of course, will come, what do you think, Father Martin, after a day? Or is that just wishful thinking?
I think that may be wishful thinking.
Yeah.
I would say most cardinals that I was speaking to said probably 2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days, which puts us obviously Thursday or Friday of this week. A number of cardinals had indicated that perhaps they think that's true. Of course, the challenge of this conclave is that these cardinals come from all over the world, and during these congregations leading up to this, they had to get to know each other, and will do so again after each one of these votes. This is Cardinal Kevin Joseph Farrell of the United States, former Bishop of Dallas, also considered to be a potential contender. But Father Walk, why is it unlikely that we would have an American Pope, a Pope from the United States?
I think that it is unlikely that there'll be a Pope from the United States, and part of it has to do with sort of geopolitics and the overlapping of the prominence on the political sphere of the United States on the world stage makes people nervous about having also the head of the Catholic Church being from the United States. So America is too much with us, I think, is what people are thinking.
Terry Moran, it'd be hard, probably within that Sistine Chapel, to elect a pope from a superpower, and certainly the United States, which already has such a place on the global stage, such influence, to then name a pope from the United States as well would be a reach.
That's always been the thinking. As Father Walk said, the superpower having the world's most global religious office would probably strike a lot of these cardinals as just too much the United States of America. There also is, the fact that right now the United States, under the leadership of President Trump, is changing things around the world in ways that are stunning a lot of people around the world, including a lot of people probably in that Sistine Chapel. The way he's trying to kind of wrench the world trading system into a new alignment, and the world security system, and a sense of nationalism, greater nationalism, and defending the national interests of the United States rather than that kind of more internationalist feel. All those have already impacted elections around the world. In Australia, most recently in Canada, there was a Trump factor. It's a question. Is there a Trump factor in the Sistine Chapel?
And Terry, these conversations that take place, I just find this so fascinating because it's one of the few places where we cannot get access as reporters and journalists, and so it just makes it even more intriguing for me and the rest of us here assembled. But once they begin within the Sistine Chapel and take those breaks for lunch, and then for certainly for dinner and to get some rest before prayer the next day and another round of voting both in the morning and in the evening, they're all fully aware of where the math is headed, that they need to get to a 2/3 majority inside that room, that they're going to need to get to that 89 vote threshold. And that's when some of the politics truly comes into play. Now, whether we can believe what we've seen in the movie The Conclave or certainly in the books that have been written about this process, there is a fair amount of, well, convincing, if you will, or sort of leaning on a peer within the cardinals to say this is the direction it's going in. Is there some compromise here? What can you share for the audience watching back home in the States about the conversations that take place once they're sequestered?
Well, David, it's interesting. Pope Francis himself provided an account of the 2005 conclave that eventually elected Pope Benedict XVI. He got a fair number of votes. Pope Benedict, then Cardinal Ratzinger, was well ahead, but Jorge Bergoglio, the future Pope Francis, got some votes, and his started to increase, apparently, through some of the votes. And maybe Cardinal Ratzinger, then Pope Benedict, didn't do as well. And what Pope Francis said years later is he felt he was being used to block Cardinal Ratzinger, and he disavowed it. And that is a political moment, no question about it.
And in fact, he thought that was the closest he would ever come to becoming Pope. And as I had mentioned earlier, Terry, he had that return ticket to Argentina during the conclave that elected him.
That's right. And there is a sense, even in American presidential elections, that somebody who wants it too much might not be the right person for such a powerful job. And I think perhaps in the Sistine Chapel, there's a feeling of that as well. They are discerning. They are trying to sense and figure out what the best path is and what the best person is. You mentioned the number 89, however. That is the 2/3 majority number. The other number is 45. Right, that's the number that could block 2/3, and that could be politically important in their consideration as well.
The final oath here, the final individual oath of the cardinals inside the Sistine Chapel after having taken that group oath together. And silence now fills that room. We are not long from those famous words that will send anyone who is not an elector from the Sistine Chapel. Let's listen.
Extra omnes.
Of course, extra omnes, those are the key words in Latin, meaning everybody out, everybody who is not an elector in that room. There will just be a couple of people who remain in that room to help deliver a meditation about the weight of the moment. You can see those who are not electors now leaving the room, the Sistine Chapel, and of course the Swiss Guard standing outside those doors. And for those cardinals inside hearing extra omnes, Linsey, I think that's the finality of this moment for all of them, that they're not leaving that room, at least not until there's one vote under their belt.
Right, not for likely 7 days. In my research, it says in the last 179 years, the average has been 3.3 days. So that math does get us to, as the cardinal that James spoke to, that it would be likely that we'll have a new pope by Friday.
As we watch these images, I want to bring in Maggie Rulli from down in St. Peter's Square. And Maggie, I gather it's not as crowded as it will be over the course of the next couple of days when anticipation builds. Oh, look, Maggie has a lot of room to herself in the square. That will not be the case come Thursday or Friday, Maggie.
David, you're exactly right. We've been feeling that anticipation building, but just imagine this, David. whenever we see that white smoke billowing into the sky, whatever that might be, we're expecting thousands of people to come rushing into St. Peter's Square, surrounding us here. This has a capacity of 250,000. That's going to get maxed out. We expect people in the streets. They already have 5,000 police and volunteers on hand. So imagine that energy. I mean, David, we're already feeling it today. So I think when that moment comes here, we're going to be literally standing in the middle of history, David.
And we'll be here to witness that history with you, Maggie. Our thanks to you again, Maggie Rulli, right down in St. Peter's Square. You can hear the bells tolling behind me as those who are not involved in the election of this next pope leave the Sistine Chapel. Only the electors stay inside that room. And again, there are 133 of them taking part in this conclave, the most diverse conclave that we have witnessed in our time. And of course, Pope Francis appointing 108 of those electors. They need to reach a 2/3 majority, which puts you at the 89 vote mark before they will send white smoke up that small chimney that will emerge atop the Sistine Chapel. We saw those magnificent images in the last couple of days of Vatican firefighters on top of the Sistine Chapel, actually putting that chimney back into place. And now the doors close. You can hear the applause breaking up behind us here in St. Peter's Square. As those doors, the echo of the closing of the doors heard across Vatican City, Father Martin, and the Swiss Guard standing there beside those doors. We know that inside, and I already want to get to what's then still playing out inside on the other side of that door, even though we're not allowed in, Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa was chosen earlier by the College of Cardinals. He'll give a meditation concerning the grave duty incumbent on them and thus on the need to act with right intention for the good of the universal church. And he'll tell them having only God before your eyes.
Yeah, great images of the doors closing and extra omnes. It really does underline the secrecy of everything. Cardinal Cantalamessa was the papal preacher. He would preach during retreats. The Pope liked him very much and made him a cardinal. And so this is just a kind of meditation, or sometimes we would say a fervorino, kind of exhortation to follow the Holy Spirit and also maintain that secrecy.
With just a couple moments left, the sun shining over St. Peter's Square, James. It started out rainy today, but a glorious afternoon here at the Vatican.
Yeah, David, I'm just marveling at what we've just witnessed. The mystery of all this, the history, the tradition. You know, we live in such a fast-paced world. Everything is immediate. We want it right now. Well, these cardinals are teaching us some patience. We're going to have to wait, and we'll be right here waiting.
Terry Moran, a medieval moment for sure, as James points out, for a church that's 2,000 years old, back to its roots. No communication now with the cardinals who will elect the new pope.
There's nothing else like it in the world, an election like this. It does have those ancient roots, and what they do is take away many of the distractions of the modern world, right? There's no cell phones in there. There's no communication. It's the cardinals with each other and their prayers.
Just a stunning backdrop, the clear blue sky here, and it's almost similar to what we felt here in the last couple of weeks, Pope Francis's funeral. And the crowds gathered, and Lindsay, I was struck by the applause that broke out across St. Peter's Square behind us.
And people smiling, really delighting in this moment. The God shot, really, right, as the sun is beaming through the clouds. Something certainly spiritual about this moment.
No question about that. And again, the voting, there should be one round of voting this afternoon, and we will carry that to you as soon as we have a signal from the chimney at top of the Sistine Chapel, though likely not the deciding vote. Thank you for watching. I'll be back on the air this afternoon to let you know what happens in the first vote. And I'll see you for World News Tonight. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Welcome back to ABC News Live First. You've been watching ABC News special coverage as the conclave gets underway at the Vatican. Cardinals from 70 countries are now sequestered. Just a little while ago, they took an oath of secrecy before they start voting for a new pope. That College of Cardinals will vote 2 times in the morning and 2 times in the evening until at least 2/3 agree on one name. After each vote, the ballots are burned and the smoke emanating from the chimney on top of the Sistine Chapel indicates the results. White smoke means a pope has been chosen. Black smoke means they have to vote again. And I want to bring in our Patrick Reevell, who's there in Rome right now. Patrick, what's it like as these cardinals are now officially sequestered and starting that process of the conclave?
Hi, Dan. Yeah, we're down here. We've been seeing people stopping and watching these big screens that are lined up all the way down to St. Peter's there. People watching what was going on inside the Vatican and watching this process of the cardinals filing into the Sistine Chapel, where they then swore this oath of secrecy. They swore it in Latin, and we watched each of the 133 cardinal electors do that. We watched the famous words said by the masters of ceremony, extra omnes, the Latin phrase meaning everybody out. People then file out, everyone except the cardinals, and then we saw the doors of the Sistine Chapel swing shut with this dramatic clanging sound, and now the conclave is begun. They will now begin their first round of voting in there, and as you say, we expect to see tonight the first smoke coming from the Sistine Chapel's chimney, black or white, black meaning no decision, white meaning a pope has been chosen. I think very few people expect that we will see white smoke tonight. But as you say now, the conclave thoroughly begun.
And Patrick, what do we know about what's happening behind closed doors right now?
Yeah, Dan, so we know that once the doors close and once everyone has left, the voting process will begin following a brief statement by an ecclesiastic who will basically remind the cardinals of their of the importance of what they're about to do, and then the voting will take place. First, there will be it will be silence. It will not be a chamber of debate. There will not be people giving campaign speeches. Instead, it will be a time for first silent prayer while the cardinals then decide on their votes. They will write their votes on a single piece of paper. Then each of them will individually go up to the urn at the front, which is underneath Michelangelo's painting of the Last Judgment. And there they will say a phrase pledging that they believe this is the right choice. They will put their vote into the urn. And then once all the cardinals have voted, each ballot will be threaded with a piece of string. They will be counted up. And then once that has happened, they will be placed into a furnace for the chimney. They will actually add now some chemicals to make it black or white, because in the past there used to be some confusion apparently when they used to try and do it with purely natural means. They don't want any confusion. But we will see, we expect in the next few hours, some type of smoke coming from the Sistine Chapel's chimney, Diane.
And Patrick, 108 of the 133 voting cardinals were appointed by Pope Francis. So most of these cardinals have never done this before.
Yeah, Diane, this is the most diverse conclave in history. As you say, 80% of them appointed by Pope Francis, who made it a point of his papacy to find and appoint cardinals from all corners of the world and from places that have never had cardinals before, in particular outside of Europe. And so many of them, for many of them, this will be their first experience of voting in a conclave. It's the first time that many of them will have met each other. But for the last 2 weeks since Pope Francis's death, there has been these general congregations, which are these pre-conclave meetings here at the Vatican, where basically the cardinals are able to get together and meet and discuss some of their ideas, discuss the sort of pope that they want to see come out of this. So for many of them, it will be a first experience. We've even heard some reports of cardinals watching the movie Conclave to try and get an idea of what to expect. But now, with the closing of those doors, with the ceremony of with the oaths being sworn to secrecy, we really now will see the beginning of this conclave, and we'll wait now to see the first smoke, Diane.
Yeah, not a movie anymore. Now it's happening for real. So, Patrick, is there any sense of the number of cardinals having been appointed by Pope Francis, of that having any influence in the next pope and who they choose?
Yeah, Dan, I mean, I think it's believed very much to potentially have an impact. I think, the central question of this conclave is, will it produce a pope who follows who wants to follow the same more liberal, open legacy of Pope Francis, one focus on outreach to the poor, on social justice issues. Pope Francis, of course, also liberalizing the church's attitudes towards LGBTQ issues, also focusing the church on climate issues. And we've heard from many cardinals over the past few days that they do believe that it's very important that the church remains following that more open path of Pope Francis. And there's also belief as part of that whether that means we could perhaps see the first Asian Pope, for example. One of the top front runners going into this is Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines. He is considered to be really among the top contenders, and so he's often called the Asian Francis. And you know, we've heard from people saying they believe it is a possibility, but ultimately this is seen as a pretty open field, and we will have to wait and see who is elected, Diane.
We sure will. All right, I want to head over to James Longman now. Patrick, thank you. James has also been following this for us from there in the Vatican. Beautiful view, James. So walk me through this. They vote up to 4 times a day. Is there a specific timeline for that?
Yeah, so there's going to be a vote later today. We don't know exactly when. They're likely going to start their voting pretty soon, actually, in the next sort of 5-10 minutes, I guess. I wish I was in there. I'm not. In about an hour, we'll get smoke of some description. Black or white? It's going to be black, I would have said, because they're not going to have made a decision this early on. They'll be burning those ballots, and then we'll see the smoke. And then they will go away for a night of contemplation to think about the names that were read out at tonight's vote. What usually happens in the first vote, and we know this because there's been a book written about what happened when Francis was elected, is a lot of the cardinals get 1 vote. It's kind of a level of respect for some of the senior cardinals. But there are cardinals, obviously, who get more than that, the key number, of course, being 89. That's how many votes you need to win. So there'll be cardinals with a handful of votes, maybe up to 15, 20 maybe in this first round. And then tonight, the cardinals will go away back to their quarters at Santa Marta. Remember, they are cut off from the rest of the world, and they will have time to think, to reflect on the names that they now know are in the public sphere. Then they'll come back, 2 votes in the morning, 2 votes in the evening, until we get a pope. Dan?
All right, we'll be watching. James Longman, thank you. And we will be keeping a close eye on that chimney on top of the Vatican for you. We'll bring you the results of the first vote later today, right here on ABC News Live. And we have much more news for you after the break. Stay with us.
Whenever, wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed.
Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas,
Edinburgh, Scotland.
from Poland once again tonight. Thank you so much for streaming with us. Ukrainian refugees here in Warsaw. Do you think you'll ever be able to go back home? We're heading to a small community outside of Mexico City. Splintered houses and splintered lives. The magnitude of the devastation. You're streaming ABC News Live. Reporting from Rolling Fork, Mississippi, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Raleigh, North Carolina, the U.S. Capitol, Mayfield, Kentucky, Minneapolis, Mexico, Tongass National Forest, Alaska.
Getting you behind the stories as they happen, giving you a front row seat to our world as it plays out in real time, live.
ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Stream ABC News Live weeknights, America's most honored streaming news program, only on ABC News Live, streaming free right now wherever you stream your news.
ABC's Nightline, the stories that shape your world, that shape your life. Dramatic, stunning, empowering, life-changing. For 45 years, the most powerful stories of our time.
This is Nightline.
Wherever the story is, Nightline will take you there. Just because it's late night doesn't mean you should be in the dark. For a brighter take on the day, this is ABC's Nightline. After Kimmel, late night on ABC.
Whenever news breaks,
We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
Wherever the story is,
We're going to take you there.
ABC News Live. You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere. ABC's David Muir, the most watched newscast in America. More Americans watch World News Tonight with David Muir than any other newscast.
It's a View Live exclusive with Joe and Jill Biden. Their first interview anywhere since the election. Don't miss it. Tomorrow on ABC's The View.
You're watching America's #1 streaming news. Live reporting, breaking new exclusives. Keep streaming with ABC News Live.
Welcome to this special edition of ABC News Live First. I'm Diane Macedo.
And I'm James Longman in Vatican City, where the conclave is now underway. Cardinals from 70 countries are now sequestered. Just a little while ago, they took an oath of secrecy before they start voting for a new pope. That College of Cardinals will vote 2 times in the morning from tomorrow, 2 times in the evening, until at least a 2/3 agree on one name. After each set of votes, I should say, the ballots are burned and the smoke from that chimney on top of the Sistine Chapel will indicate the result. White smoke means a pope has been chosen. Black means they have to vote again. I want to bring in our Patrick Reevell, who is here at Vatican City. Patrick, I can see you. Oh no, you're in Rome, so you're at the end of the road that links Rome with the Vatican City. Tell me what it's like where you are now.
Hi, James. Yeah, just